Moonsorrow. In 2011, this was a group that was one of two that captured the Album of the Year with an album whose name I was never comfortable attempting to say. Now, doing a little bit of research, there's an English translation of that album title, which is roughly "As Shadows We Walk in the Land of the Dead." This album was transformative. It was absolutely wonderful, and one that prompted the talk of whether or not Moonsorrow has always been this fantastic group, or if this is truly all of that much of a surprise. And if you dig into the discography, you start to realize that it's not surprising that they were able to release something of such classic proportion. So we move on now to their next release, 5 years removed from 2011, 5 years removed from that Album of the Year winner, or co-winner really, and we get The Age of Gods. Now, what you just saw below me is the official name of the album, but The Age of Gods is the translation. I don't really want to ruin the language with horrible attempts of trying to say Jumalten Aika throughout this entire album review, which is probably wrong. So we're going to stick with some translations just for a little bit of clarity. Now, after 5 years, you would think that Moonsorrow would have to really make some changes, maybe add a couple of new tools to the toolkit, so to speak, in order to really impress once again. But Moonsorrow's brand of music, which they don't like to associate really with folk metal or Viking metal, they instead like to call it heathen metal, is one that speaks volumes for its creative process, considering a lot of these kind of occur very naturally in the studio, as opposed to kind of going in with these concrete ideas in mind. They're instead ones that grow, as the band themselves has stated, extremely organically. And I believe that is part of the reason why Moonsorrow is an appealing group, because it is something that is a bit easy to tell, just the way in which things flow together. And the repetition that you hear on some of these tracks, and the repetition that you hear throughout Moonsorrow's material, is actually, it serves more as a transitional piece in order to gain from one part of the song, one part of the track to the next. And these are almost like multi-part tracks without there being any sort of indication of separation on the track listing itself. It's all purely musical. So we have on this album, on the main course of the album, 5 songs, 4 of which eclipse the 12-minute mark. In fact, really, you could say that the title track at 12:43, just bump it up to 13 minutes, and you have 4 epics and then one song that's only 7 minutes. Now, I love the fact that this album seems to draw a lot of the same inspiration as their last disc did, because it still has that very epic feel. It's almost like this was material that was perhaps being just toyed around with whenever the last sessions were going on, but there's a lot of building block that happens here. There's a lot of built within the songs themselves that occur. And it's almost like there is a bit of an idea that this band wants to do as far as construction-wise, to have a main idea, to have a bit of a break in the middle, and then go toward a secondary idea, and then try to wrap it all together. Sort of a basic song structure that they then extend to make epic, and really use their own collective influence and collective musical knowledge to sort of get themselves there. You hear a good bit of that on The Age of Gods, the very first track, so if this is your first foray into Moonsorrow, you're going to get a grand scope of what their sound and what their process is really all about. It's a great first place to really start. Going right into Plague Grove and People of the Dayless Day, this is more of a, this really indicates that it's a 2-song affair. This is one that at more than 15 minutes, this is sort of make or break for some folks. The 13-minute opener could easily be as well, but if you're not a fan of lengthy tracks, this album may be a bit of a struggle for you, and really their material may just be difficult for you to get into. You need to sort of ignore that idea and just listen to it for the sake of the music itself, because the music itself makes the runtime feel so much shorter, and that's one of the reasons why Huto, off of their last album, which translates to The Scream, for being a 16-minute long track, felt so much shorter than that. It felt like perhaps 7 or 8 at the maximum. It was amazing to see how Moonsorrow somehow, some way, through the magical power of music, makes time seem to really function at a faster clip than it, actually does, or maybe at a slower clip. I don't know. It's a really weird metaphor to try to make, but you kind of understand what I'm saying. It's one where the runtime and how long it actually feels that you're listening to a song don't feel like they measure up exactly. But Plague Grove is definitely an early highlight on this disc, and you might say with 5 tracks, an early highlight seems like it's just a highlight period, but it's one that showcases the dynamisty of this group, able to sort of turn on a dime right there in the middle with that transitional element, whereas with the Age of Gods, that transitional point about 7 to 8 minutes in was able to serve as a nice glaring introduction into what was going to become the final measure, the final idea of the song. This instead transitions into 2 separate musical ideas. It does so very well. I love the fact that there's moments on this album where this wall of sound effect that you get from the guitar, the bass, and all the other instruments just sort of cascades around you. And then whenever those harsh vocals come to town and come to play and give you that epic, grandiose battle feel, it's just something that manifests itself so nicely and crafts. It crafts a certain thought into your brain, but it also gives you sort of this nice, serene feel also, almost as though there's a lot of attribution to nature going within this, almost as though the same principles and ideas that perhaps Agalok subscribes to whenever they create their music are now being used in a more harsh tone, in a different way by Moonsorrow, but they're crafting essentially the same result, something that is wonderful to listen to, definitely makes you feel very close to nature and the world that surrounds you, while also having sort of a very high battle feeling to them just based off of construction. Moving into Wolf's Hour, the shortest track on this album, is one that you would really see them trying to promote this album for, or with, should I say, and that's exactly what they have done. It's a nice, quick little number, but after having 2 tracks that nearly take up 30 minutes of this, over an hour-long affair, it's like, wow, where did that time go? It feels like listening to a 3-minute track by a pop artist, in the fact that that time just seems to disappear. And then you get into Mimor's Well, and then The Age of Man, which is a bow into darkness, in parentheses and parentheticals there. And that right there, those 2 tracks span nearly the same amount of time, 15, 55, and 16 minutes respectively. So it's 32 minutes dedicated to the second half of the album with just these 2 tracks alone. And again, very much mirrors the idea that you heard from The Age of Gods and Plague Grove, including People of the Dayless Day, in construction. But I would have to say that the finale, I would have to say that The Age of Man, A Bow into Darkness, is the song that reminds me most closely to the track that absolutely sold me on their last album, which was Huto, The Scream. It just has that same constructive appeal. It has that same repetitious ideal. It has that same closeness to really blurring that line between battle and also between nature that we just spoke about. And overall, just the way in which this closes out the album leaves it with such a dense feeling that you feel very satisfied whenever you leave this song. And I like the fact that the transition that you hear between Mimor's Well and The Age of Man, which really kind of flows synonymously, almost gives the suggestion that this started off as a 32-minute long finale that they just opted to break up into 2 musical ideas, and then eventually it became potentially 3. The second half of this disc could easily function by itself, without separation, and I would have no qualms with that. The musical ideas are different, don't get me wrong, so you're not so much seeing the themes of Mimor's Well return all of that often on The Age of Man, but instead, the way in which the transitional element between the tracks, the sort of very earthy or very, kind of man of the earth or man of, the land, sounds that you hear, the very faint, dispellance of wind that causes a little bit of dissonance on the recording. It's just a really nice little transition, and it makes all the difference in the world. It's one where you can set up almost, if you listen to a concept record that maybe divides itself into 8 portions, but it's still all one continuous track, this is something that you would see as a separation idea in a concept album such as that variety. I'm looking specifically at something like 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence, or there's a Fates Warning album that did the exact same thing, a different shade of gray, a pale, something on that variety. My mind just spaced, but it's one of those elements where you just see it, nice and neatly divide 2 ideas that are supposed to eventually perhaps interconnect, but in this case, that's not really what they're going for. This is an album that gives you a lot to talk about, even without having to describe the music all of that much, because the music itself is one that should be experienced as opposed to purely spoken about. That wall of sound that I speak about is the way in which their guitar work, their bass work, their percussion, and anything else just sort of fades right from the background of this disc into your face, along with the very aggressive vocals. It's something that really transmits a certain idealism that is wonderful to behold. And it gives you that sort of positive feeling while you're listening to it. This is not a band that you're going to try to break your neck headbanging to, but you very easily could headbang to. This is instead an album that's going to just keep those horns very subtly up, perhaps with a nice little bang like that. And just throughout the experience, you feel like you're growing. You feel like you're growing closer not only to this band, you feel like you're growing a little bit closer to yourself. It's a bit of an inward journey reflected in a very outward way, if that makes any sense whatsoever. I would give this album a 93 out of 100. Moonsorrow return after 5 years. They deliver an album that feels very closely knit to their last one, and it's one where that's what they needed to do. That was a positive idea for them to sort of be within that same comfort zone, but still have these two albums sound, intermittently different, is something that causes that separation. And I would love to see the evolution from that disc to, here with the Age of Gods to whatever comes next in this band's career. I feel like they are almost incapable of, really leaving a stinker simply because the style that they employ is just so infinitely interesting. It really is. It's something that can kind of go in any direction. And even in the moments where it doesn't seem to move very much at all, it still feels very engaging and still feels very much like you are right there within the music itself, almost living it. Very cinematic in some scopes, especially if you're somebody that has a very active imagination, a very active brain, somebody who can associate things such as, setting, either that or feeling to the music that you're listening to. But I want to know what you think about the Age of Gods. I know this is a bit lengthy for a review for Moonsorrow, very similar to the tracks on this disc. This will still end up being shorter than 4 of the 5 songs on the album, so I hope that you did enjoy this review, and I hope that you do enjoy the album, but let me know in the comments below. My name is coverkillernation, and I will talk to each and every one of you guys next time. Thanks once again, and see you later.